All right, welcome to another AFC North update. This one after week 10, heading into week 11 of the NFL season. If you're looking for a specific team, I will have that marked in chapters in the time scroll thing. So if you want to go down to the scroll bar and search for a specific team that's there, that'll be right there for you. And the standings remain the same, but the outlook is quite a bit different from where it was last week, starting with the still division leading Baltimore Ravens falling to 7-3 overall, now 2-2 in the division. They lost in a wild game to Cleveland, final score 33-31. I did make a video about this game on Sunday, but if you're a Ravens fan, I probably would not recommend it for you though. For Baltimore, this is a story that has become a bit all too familiar over the past couple of years, where you have a late multi-score lead and it gets blown, resulting in a loss for the Ravens. Now, for the Browns, I did talk about how all three units contributed to the win in that one, but for Baltimore, all three of their units did contribute to the loss. On offense, you had that pick six that was thrown off of a deflection late in that game, ended up putting the Browns within one, and it would have tied the game if Dustin Hopkins didn't miss the extra point. Offensively, also, they put it in park in the fourth quarter, really not able to get anything going. Defensively, really the entire second half was a bit rough for them. They gave up that super long touchdown drive in the third quarter, then another quick touchdown drive in the fourth, and then that game-winning field goal drive where pretty much the Ravens just kind of got bullied in the ground game, especially once the Browns got close to field goal range. It was just give it to the running back. I've seen that dog pile push where Jerome Ford gets carried for about another 5 or 10 yards just on their kind of like a tush push, but just kind of like just a big old rugby pile is getting the Ravens shoved back further into their own territory. Then for the special teams, it wasn't necessarily anything that they did late in that game, but that blocked kick by Justin Tucker did kind of have an impact in the game if you think about it, where if Justin Tucker makes that 55-yard field goal, the Browns are trying for a touchdown at the end of that game and not a field goal. And if that's the case, then who knows what we're talking about as far as how that game ends up playing out in the long run. But for the Ravens, there is still good news out of this. They're still first in the division. That's what a long stretch of winning does for you. It does give you that cushion. And if the Ravens can get back to their winning ways, if every team wins out, well, I guess with the Ravens having divisional games, not everyone can win out in the division. But if the Ravens win out and they take care of the business that they can take care of, the Ravens still could win this division pretty much by just taking care of business. They have also seemed to have found a diamond in the rough with Keaton Mitchell. He go fast. He is a quick one, and that kind of speed will definitely get you places in the NFL. So a good find by Baltimore. Real diamond in the rough there for Keaton Mitchell, undrafted rookie there. And they have a chance to turn it around quicker than usual. Usually have to wait until at least next Sunday in order to try to get that bad taste of losing out of their mouths. But the Ravens and that coaching staff and their fan base, they play tomorrow night or tonight, depending on when you're watching, or maybe you're watching this after the Thursday night game. You already know what happened, but they play on Thursday Night Football against the Cincinnati Bengals, so another opportunity against a divisional opponent. If they beat the Bengals they would really put the Bengals in the dust as far as the AFC North divisional picture. But they did have the opportunity to leave the Browns in the dust last week as well. They just couldn't get it done. So that leads us into the second place Pittsburgh Steelers, improving to 6-3 overall, still 2-0 in the division. They win another game, this time against the Packers, final score of 23-19. And early against Green Bay, the offense, that the unit that I've been really criticizing and hammering, they looked competent. They were putting up a decent number of points early on in this game. That's all well and good. And then you realize that the Steelers are playing against a Joe Barry coached defense. And I mean, come on, that's like taking candy from a baby and crediting yourself as like a master cat burglar or something. I mean, obviously you'd rather look good than not look good on offense, but having a decent outburst against the Packers defense, I wouldn't call that much to brag about there. But I do feel like, despite me having very similar questions about the Pittsburgh Steelers week after week after week, and just kind of me and I'm sure many others just kind of side-eyeing them and wondering just how long they can keep this up, they just keep on pulling out wins in these football games. And even now, I still question the overall ability of this offense to consistently keep it together for 60 minutes. I feel like Matt Canada, that's not even a question. He's just a bad offensive coordinator, just unquestionably terrible at his job, but they're getting the results to keep him at his position. I know Kenny Pickett's certainly had some very good moments in clutch moments for him, but it does seem like it comes at the cost of being pretty bad for the rest of the game. Like the first three quarters, it doesn't really look like much of an NFL quarterback with promise, but then in the fourth quarter, all of a sudden, it's like all that bad play is somehow kind of like the good karma that reinforces itself onto him, and he turns into like the next Brady or Joe Montana or whoever in the fourth quarter. It's insane. But Mike Tomlin's whatever crazy voodoo magic he has with that Pittsburgh Steelers team, it is still in effect. At the very least, it looks like another winning season is certainly in the books for this one. I know they haven't gotten there yet, but at this current point, there's no reason to think that they won't get at least to a winning season. And they could very well be leading the AFC North after this week. If the Ravens fall to Cincinnati, they could take first place in the AFC North with a win over Cleveland. They played that at the Browns' home stadium. And that, speaking of the Cleveland Browns, they are still third place in the division. Also 6-3 overall, 2-2 in the division. Well, I was going to be covering some things that I missed in my initial coverage of the Ravens game and just kind of talk about, maybe like that block Cedric Tillman had on Kyle Van Noy or some other things. But instead, there was much more impactful news today. Deshaun Watson out for the season, needing surgery on his shoulder. After posting his best half of football in a Browns uniform, he is gone. Again, I know they were looking at an MRI on his ankle, which revealed to be a high ankle sprain after Deshaun Watson saying, yeah, he'll be good to go against Pittsburgh, which just another case of Deshaun Watson saying he's going to be fine with an injury, and then it turns out he's not necessarily fine, except this time it's not just going to be for a couple weeks, it's going to be for the rest of the season. And no matter what you want to call it, if you want to call it the Cleveland curse or just karma coming back to bite you or whatever it is now simply reality for the Cleveland Browns. As I mentioned earlier, the Browns, they do play the Steelers in Cleveland this week, and the reports are they plan on starting DTR at quarterback. Dorian Thompson-Robinson will get the start over PJ Walker, who's usually been in since DTR had a pretty bad performance against Baltimore for Cleveland. At this point, you do know what PJ Walker is and what he brings to the table for the Browns, and it's just not really good enough to get anywhere in the playoffs, even if you're even able to make it with PJ Walker in at quarterback. So I guess from the standpoint of you have to see what you have in DTR. We'll see if he can look better now than he did last time, where him and the coaching staff actually do have time to prepare for him starting. He's not just going to be thrown out there on literally 2.5 hours notice. They're actually going to be able to put together a game plan around him, and he's going to be able to mentally prepare for starting against a really good Pittsburgh Steelers defense. Whereas again, last time, his first time out there, he was just kind of thrown in there last second against a Ravens defense that is also one of the best in the NFL. Also, this injury to Deshaun Watson does not change how good the defense has been or how they will be in the future. They've been the one keeping Cleveland in games most of the time. But if Cleveland is going to get where they want to go, which is to at least be in the conversation for competing for a Super Bowl spot, which again, maybe that's a laughable want for the Browns, especially now that with Deshaun Watson out, but that's where the Browns want to be this year. The offense can't just be a big pile of dog poo that's hoping to constantly get bailed out by the defense. So hopefully DTR shows more of what we saw in the preseason. And I just realized that I've summed up pretty much every Browns quarterback ever since they came back in '99. So that will lead us to the still basement Cincinnati Bengals, now 5-4 overall, 0-2 in the division, taking a tough loss to C.J. Stroud and the Houston Texans, losing 30-27 on a last-second field goal. Another last-second field goal game in the AFC North. T. Higgins out for this one, and maybe if he's on the receiving end of that potential go-ahead touchdown pass at the end of the game instead of Boyd, we could be having a different conversation about the Cincinnati Bengals. But they'll have to manage without Boyd again for their big game tomorrow against Baltimore, as he's going to be out once again. Jamar Chase also questionable for their last game, but he had a really good game against Houston. If he was hurting, it definitely did not show up on the field. And as I said last week, that game against Houston definitely could be a challenge for that Bengals defense that's been really solid up to this point, as surprising me at least. The Texans offense getting the better of them a little bit in this one, but the defense did get the Bengals pretty much back into it with a deep interception in Houston territory from Taylor Britt when things were looking pretty dire for the Bengals. And if Cincy wants any shot of climbing their way back into the AFC North leading picture, this is a must-win game for them over the Ravens. And while a loss certainly would not take them out of playoff contention or anything, it wouldn't be necessarily the end of the season and run around with your hairs on fire, it would certainly create a bit of an uphill battle in that regard. And while, the Bengals, if they don't get off to that rough start early on in the year, then they definitely would have been able to absorb this loss a little bit better. The Texans, they're a feisty team this year. C.J. Stroud has been, even people that were really high on C.J. Stroud, I'm not sure if they were expecting him to be this good this early into his career. Again, the Bengals aren't in a position where if they lose, their season's over, but it does kind of put them in, again, I wouldn't call it dire. It's just one that's a bit more uncomfortable than you would like to have for the Bengals at this point in the season. You would think by the time the Bengals were playing their 10th game, they'd have like a really comfortable record. They'd be looking at, well, unless there's some massive catastrophic fall off, then of course we're going to be making the playoffs. But instead, the Bengals are still in the position of having to cobble together wins just to keep pace with the wild card race in the AFC right now, and that's just not where we expected the Bengals to be at this point. But that's going to do it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you didn't make it this far into it, leave a like and a subscribe if you enjoyed it and like to see more like it. You can let me know what you thought about any of the AFC North teams down in the comments below, and some of the AFC North action that's going to be coming up today and on today or whenever you're watching this, on Thursday and on Sunday as well. Once again, thank you for watching. I will see you at the next one.